Happy Canada Day, everybody. If you're Canadian like me, you probably can't even name that many Canadian films, if any at all. But how can that be? They're practically made in our own backyard. Well, it's pretty simple. From having no money, no Canadian stars because of no money, and the pure laziness that comes with having to watch subtitles, there isn't as much recognition to our film industry as much as it's deserved. But if that's the case, how do filmmakers like James Cameron, Norman Jewison, Egoyan, Sarah Polley, Denis Villeneuve, Jean-Marc Vallée, David Cronenberg, Mary Harron, Guy Maddin, among many others, find success? The easiest way to become a mainstream director seems to be to move to America, get a low-level job as a PA, and work your way up over the course of years. Either that or become involved in other forms of media such as acting, journalism, even installation art that can help you find the type of stories and techniques you want to use. It sounds simple on paper, I know, but thankfully those aren't the only ways. If you're a French language filmmaker, you'll have a small amount of success that nobody will recognize. Foreign language films rarely have huge profit returns, but they more than often make up for that when they premiere at film festivals. Festivals where major stars and producers have a chance to see your potential and maybe even express interest in collaborating with you. What seems to be the hardest and longest but still most rewarding way to achieve success, again, sounds simple on paper. Your films need to stick to one genre and/or one recurring theme. I know that sounds like common sense, I mean, video essays rely a lot on directors with one genre or theme, but there are two crucial details that again are common sense. It has to be a good theme and message, and it has to be done well, which is why so many directors, some of which I'm about to mention, struggle with this problem. David Cronenberg is famous for using body horror as a way to satirize and comment on things such as science being weaponized and misused, while Sarah Polley, fictional or documentary, makes films that center on romance where people's relationship commitments are tested. And ever since his first film, Denis Villeneuve has revolved around experiencing family tragedy. And it's such a universal message that it gives him the potential to explore it in multiple genres and make it larger in scope and stakes. Egoyan, on the other hand, has received acclaim for films about isolation like Sweet Hereafter and Calendar, but he's had much more commercial success with erotic-themed films like Exotica, Where the Truth Lies, and Chloe. Guy Maddin's style, made to recreate the feel of silent or early sound films, are what make him hilariously unique and recognized so little. Whereas Mary Harron's films either center around crimes committed by women or against women, and the themes of those individual films center around those acts of violence. But you'll notice something with each individual filmmaker: they have their own identity that makes them easily recognizable. Which raises the question, what about the Canadian film industry's identity itself? It goes without saying many of our most successful films are sports comedies, cause really, what the fuck else do we do other than play hockey? Oh, right, curling. There are so many movies in Canada that rely on our year-long love of winter sports over strong characters, unpredictable stakes, or examining the cultural love of hockey or curling or whatever the hell else we play. Which is exactly why we forget most of these movies. And thank God there are ones that are funny for the reasons I just mentioned, and can be funny to you even if you're American or British or wherever you're from. And it's easy to assume French language films get the most recognition from magazines, newspapers, and cinephiles because, yeah, they do. But there are other films featuring other cultures, whether they're native to Canada or center on characters from abroad sharing their own beliefs and struggles with us. If your film centers on themes that are universal to many cultures, there's a more likely chance that festivals will recognize your accomplishments. The reason you don't see many Hindu Canadian films or First Nation films is pretty simple. It comes down to most audiences lacking knowledge of Indian or First Native culture, and without people in those seats, there isn't enough money left to continue to tell more stories, which in turn comes from a lack of advertising, say for some channels like CBC, especially when it's hockey night. And not to mention having few star talents, and even when they do, they're more established as movie stars, let alone Canadian actors. Sports or no sports, Canadian films aren't exactly popular either way. No shit, I know. But the Canadian film industry believes more in artistic integrity than making its budget back. And thankfully, there's an organization called the National Film Board, our nation's public producer and distributor of distinctive and audacious audiovisual content. Apparently, the only way to show works that reflect Canadian point of view is through experimental animation, short films, documentaries, alternative dramas, make up your mind on whatever that means, and interactive works. And people wonder why our features don't make it that big. Don't get me wrong, the National Film Board does a lot for Canadian filmmakers by providing them work, but it is one thing to be artistic. It's another not to take mainstream cinema and mainstream filmmakers seriously because, God forbid, they can have more to say and inspire people just as much to make their own work. It's true we have people like Paul Gross who make mainstream stylized films about Canadian culture and history such as Passchendaele or Hyena Road, and he's even done mainstream movies like Men with Brooms or Gunless, but he's honestly the only one I can mention who tries to make mainstream Canadian films in Canada consistently. And it's becoming harder for him now that he can't really make his budget back. I mean, I liked Hyena Road, but how many other people did? But like I said, the National Film Board does a lot for Canadian filmmakers who usually get the shaft. Studio D, for example, served 22 years as a government funding for women filmmakers. Until it got shut down for government cuts. Yeah. On a more positive note, in 2017, they've announced a 3-year plan to hire more Indigenous staff members and give 15% of production spending for Indigenous works, so we can see more films by animators and documentary filmmakers to create new educational pieces about First Nations in Canada. Now, considering this is a pretty niche production that doesn't really have that much to work with, it does make sense why you would focus more on things like that as opposed to making more mainstream films. And that's probably why documentaries are produced most often in Canada. If Indigenous people are so rarely recognized in fiction, and even when they are, the momentum is pretty short-lived, why not represent their own culture in a niche market that's more likely to have a small, but incredibly devoted following, not to mention receive deserved recognition at film festivals? Hell, Canadian culture itself is so rarely noticed other than our love of sports, that our history, identity, politics, sense of humor... Outside of our country, who else recognizes those things? It's really no wonder that Canadian fiction or nonfiction itself relies so much on explaining who we are to ourselves. Canadian television has a lot more luck than Canadian films for these reasons. Shows like Corner Gas, Red Green, and Letterkenny rely more on character archetypes and witty dialogue that feel like it's their own individual style. But the setting can still take place anywhere in Canada or the States, given on the geographical location and the way these characters behave, making it a lot more identifiable for certain audiences. And sketch comedy shows like Air Farce, Codco, and This Hour Has 22 Minutes knew exactly how Canadians felt about their politics, and they used it to their fullest advantage. Norman Jewison is said as quoting, "Most Canadian comedy is either irony or satire," and in his mind, it was the classy kind of comedy. And yeah, you know what? He's absolutely right about it. I think it's the reason I watched Air Farce all the time as a kid, even though I didn't even understand half the references. And while I will admit I'm not as big of a fan as Letterkenny as most people, I do recognize that it has a distinctively Canadian style. I can even find American audiences laughing at it because the cinematography and the deadpan humor do kind of have a Wes Anderson feel to it. Does anybody else recognize that?
Look at that fucking treasure trail.
What's up with your fucking body hair, Big Shoots? You look like a 12-year-old Dutch girl. Your aesthetician coiffed that for you?
You can kiss my aesthetician.
Look, the bottom line is, if we want to recognize our own frickin' culture in fiction, you gotta watch your own fiction. And if you hate your own fiction, as an artist, you can create your own content, pitch your ideas to the National Film Board, to CBC, or any other Canadian studio that's looking for a unique vision. There's a lot more of them out there than you think. And as an audience member, keep searching through old and new films and you might find something you'd never expected that was both Canadian and good. If that doesn't work, look on the bright side. You're not the only ones who don't know something about Canada.
Oh, Canada, a great big empty land. We look to America for a helping hand. Organic bread and caribou eggs, food are big and cold. Canada, we
we're close to the North Pole.
Manger poutine. Canada, a lovely winter dream.
Oh, Canada.